The way we learn and fun are mutually exclusive. You can't learn and have fun at the same time. Well, at least it appears to be that way. Revising before exams isn't fun. Going over content that you didn't understand in class isn't fun. I don't know, cutting 200 words off an essay isn't fun either. Now, don't get me wrong, I would say I like learning, and I enjoy school most of the time, but it has its issues. The lack of effective student motivation, the lack of student engagement, or the bland and dry presentation of even the most interesting topics. I think every single one of you in this room has at least one school-related complaint. Although, let's not kid ourselves, it's probably more. Overall, it would be a stretch to say that our educational systems are suitable to the current state of the world, or particularly enjoyable for that matter. You know what is fun though? Games. And I think that we can teach using games. There are two main ways in which this is being done right now. First, you have gamification, the taking of game elements and placing them in non-game environments to make those more engaging. We can see this all around us. How many of you here are familiar with a Duolingo OWL, or in other words, know what Duolingo is? Can we get a quick show of hands? Please raise your hand if you know what Duolingo is. Well, quite a lot of you, I see. Thank you. Well, Duolingo is a prime example of gamification. The streak feature, the option to add friends, the leagues, the periodic rewards, all of this serves to make learning more engaging. And we can see many other examples in the world around us. You have the Snapstreak on Snapchat, badges in apps like Audible, or even the Starbucks loyalty program. But, as you may have gathered by now, that isn't exactly using games. It's just taking what makes games fun and applying it elsewhere to make that more fun as well. That's where the second option of using games in education comes in. You can literally just do that. You can use games to teach. I've recently started to use the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons to help students develop their English language skills. By providing them with a safe and fun environment, in addition to an engaging story and overall game, I aim to incentivize them in using the English language without the stress and pressure often present in more formal learning environments. What I've done here is I've taken an existing game and used it to pursue a learning goal, language development or speaking skills. From my perspective, this is more easily done in language-based subjects, since one of their main goals almost always is the development of speaking skills, and speaking is a natural byproduct of face-to-face games. However, that is not to say that we can't use games in other subject areas. On the contrary, there have been many attempts at this. Remember the classic history bingo? Various math games, like the pirate game, for example, or science blockbusters. I think most of you can recall at least one occasion of when you've played a game in class, right? Well, those games do have some merit. I think we can agree that they made the lesson somewhat more fun. There are two main things that I don't particularly like about these. One, the older we get, the less games in education we get. Now, you might think that this is because what we learn gets more difficult, and because of that, it, let's say, is harder to encompass within a game. Well, I don't exactly agree with that, and we'll see why later. I think the main reason for this is that, from a game design perspective, most educational games are downright bad. If it wasn't for their educational label, hardly anyone would play them voluntarily. This isn't as much of an issue for younger students, perhaps, because they seem to have a higher tolerance for this. But as we get older, we just get more demanding. At some point, taping biology terms to a memory game just stops working. And it is at this point that we usually give up on games in education. That is somewhat absurd, though. That is as if we called it a day after inventing the Turing machine and just stopped. Because who needs computers, right? Those are useless. Well, I want to show you a few gems of a game that show that it is possible to make a game that is fun and has educational value and is appealing to older audiences. The first game I want to introduce to you is the board game Daybreak. In it, players assume the role of governments working to combat climate change. They work collaboratively to reach a point called drawdown, when they would remove more carbon tokens from the board than there are carbon tokens present, which in this case represents net zero emissions. There are many aspects of this game that make it more difficult for the players. For example, the recurring global crises, or the high initial dependence on dirty energy sources and industries. Additionally, there are many ways to lose this game. You can, for example, have too many communities in crisis, the global temperature can be too high, or you just don't win in 6 turns. And while not perfectly accurate, Daybreak does a considerably good job at modeling climate change and its consequences, and potential solutions, and the difficulties with implementing them. And now that is impressive. You might be feeling a bit more techy, though, which is where the second game I want to talk about comes in. In Kerbal Space Program, you take on the role of an overseer of the space program of the Kerbal civilization as it launches progressively more ambitious missions to their planet's moon and eventually even other planets in their solar system. And while the physics engine of this game is only semi-realistic, it still allows for a very good, if somewhat simplified, simulation of orbital mechanics and many of the issues and challenges faced by aerospace engineers on a daily basis. Additionally, another thing that speaks in favor of this game is the strong fan base it has among NASA engineers and many other professionals within the space industry. Now, the final game I want to mention is one that you will most likely be familiar with. I think you've all heard about Model United Nations conferences. Well, for those who haven't, you take on the role of a delegate to a UN committee from a country and work together with your peers to draft a resolution on a specific real-world issue. Through this, you get the opportunity to develop a range of skills, such as public speaking, debating, as well as collaboration, and getting a deeper understanding of international relations. Now, it might be useful to clarify what constitutes the game design of these games in general, but also specifically Model United Nations. If you think about it, the organizers have to carefully consider which aspects or features of the UN modus operandi they want to include, exclude, and simplify in order to strike an acceptable balance between enjoyability, accessibility, and realism. These are all challenges that every game that I mentioned faces. And if we think about it more broadly, what is a game? Well, a game is a play-based activity that requires active engagement from its players. It is also an artificial rules framework. And then you have 2 optional ones. Games very often are, let's say, or face players with a specific goal that they work towards, in addition to representing a low-stakes environment. Okay, I hope you're still with me here. Now that we've agreed on, let's say, the 5 Ps are games, and have a bit of a deeper understanding of what challenges they face in their design, let's have a look at what these games have in common. Well, they're games first, educational second. What do I mean by this? Daybreak, Kerbal Space Program, and Model United Nations conferences place strong emphasis on being good games. They don't just rely on their educational label to be successful. No, they turn to rewarding game mechanics, in-depth game systems, and strong game design overall to attract players. You can tell because many people turn to these games just for fun, without any inherent motivation to learn. Also, these games simulate. the educational aspect isn't simply tacked on, but an inherent feature of their design. Many conventional educational games use simple game mechanics to make learning more fun, but that's more like gamification. Instead, these games use carefully selected game mechanics to effectively mirror the chosen real-life context. In this, they don't just tape together arbitrary game mechanics and concepts. No, they set out to, let's say, model real-life situations and scenarios in an approachable manner. Additionally, it is important to know that these games don't focus on knowledge. Instead, they prioritize building an intuitive understanding within the player. Daybreak doesn't set out to help players memorize green initiatives. No. It aims to help players gain a nuanced understanding of the topic of climate change while allowing them to have fun, by allowing them to experiment within the context of the issue. If you look at this more broadly, an in-depth, hands-on exploration of any given topic is an extremely valuable learning experience. A learning experience which a well-designed game can provide. And finally, these games take something that is inaccessible or too out of reach and place it within the player's reach. I don't know about you, but I personally don't get to be a UN delegate or launch rockets into space on a daily basis. And this is arguably the point of playing games, to try something that you cannot do, to do something new, to do something that is out of your reach. And this is what makes them, or can make them, very effective in taking theoretical content, for example, what we learn in class, and bringing it back down to the real world, back down to the ground, in a way that is enjoyable, meaningful, and intuitive for us. To sum up, thorough game design can help model a range of situations, making games useful in presenting complex issues in an approachable manner. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that if we just take games, put them in education, we're going to get a sunlit utopia with rainbows, unicorns, and everyone smiling. No, that's not going to happen. But I see games as a font of teaching that we are not tapping into. To be completely honest, it is quite puzzling to me that such a valuable learning resource is being used this ineffectively. Instead of just making education more fun by gamifying it with simple game mechanics, we should also consider making good games that also happen to be educational. Thank you.